Today's lecture is lecture number 11 in the 11th week. Especially this lecture is part C. Okay, we are learning about the JavaScript. Today we'll learn about forms. Where we are, let's look at these menus about chapters. We are learning, and we here we are learning this JS forms section and this chapter and this chapter. After that, we'll learn about some chapters, and those selected chapters will be focused on, and also some functions. 3 chapters will be focused on. Later, some modification in terms of the exclusion of some chapters that will be announced. Okay, let's start from here. This one is about form validation. In HTML, we learn about form element, and in the form usually we can put in some value, and we should check whether that value or that input that is something there. If that input is not successful, then we should check that, and that is called validation. Depending upon the type, we may check. Let's follow this one. HTML form validation can be done by JavaScript. If a form field is empty, this function alerts a message and returns false to prevent the form from being submitted. If the form is empty and the empty input that is being sent to the server, then that is redundant work, and that should be avoided. Thus, to prevent that from being sent, we are checking. This is called validation, and this function validate form is doing that. Here, some object, my form, that is the name of that form, and that is object, and there may be some input, and one input name is fname, and the value property, if that is not empty string, then name must be, if that is empty string, then that name must be filled out. That alert message will be shown out on the screen, and if there is something, then that is successful. The function can be called when the form is submitted, like this. Let's look at this real example. That is showing this one and some others. Here we learned already the action and on submit, attribute, and method. Those we learned already. And in this form, we can use this input element to get some input due to this name. And another input button, this is submit button. Okay, let's look at this one. Here, let's look at this one first. This form element. Here we can put in here, and that is related to this one. And if I am writing in something here, any arbitrary character string, then that will be the assigned to this name, fname. That is the value for that, and that will be checked here in this JavaScript function. Here, document object and the form object here, and my form is the name. There's this name, that object can be accessed, and following f name, that is here, this input element, this name, and that value here, that is a property. Thus this one will be assigned. This one is the value for that, and that is assigned to this variable x, and x will be checked whether that is empty or not. If that is not empty string, then that is successful. Let's check again here, any arbitrary character string, and submit. No error. And if there is something wrong, that means some error, no input, and empty string, then it is checking this one. This alert message will be shown like this. Name must be filled out. The message is here, and that will be shown out here. Okay, next one is about input, numeric input. Sometimes we want to get some input, a number between 1 and 10. Let's try this real example. Here, please input a number between 1 and 10. Okay, 5, and submit. Then input is okay. How about other input that is not belonging to this range? Then this one is showing out this error message, input not valid. And that is implemented in the left side with this JavaScript. Here, this one is about HTML element input, and ID name is NUMB, and the button is this one. And whenever I'm clicking this one, then on click event is happening, and that event handler is executing this my function, that is JavaScript function, and that function, my function, will be called, that will be invoked. There's here, get the value of the input field with the ID num, and let's try to enlarge a little bit, because that should be shown in a single line. Here, that value here, input value, that will be assigned to x, as we did already in the previous example. We are using get element by ID method, and this num is the name for that ID name. And if that x is not a number, 1 less than 1 or greater than 10, and that can be checked with this if statement. It's not a number, or x is below 1, or x is above 10, then that condition is okay, thus this statement will be executed. Else, that means that is successful, that is in that expected range. Then this input okay message will be shown like this. Okay, let's move to the next. As we learned in the HTML tutorial, automatically HTML form will be validated using the default validation scheme. HTML form validation can be performed automatically by the browser. If a form field name is fname here, that is empty, the required attribute. This one is the required attribute, as we learned. This one is preventing this form from being submitted. This one is checking in this client side before sending to the server to eliminate any burden of the server. Okay, here, as we learned already in the HTML tutorial, action, method, and input, but we are using this required. Please remind, this attribute is requiring some input. If there is no input, then automatically this message will be shown. Please fill out this field. That is a kind of validation using HTML attribute required. Automatic HTML form validation does not work in Internet Explorer 9 or earlier. This earlier version, or depending upon some browser, depending upon that version of that browser, that validation, HTML form validation may not work. Okay, recent browser, you don't need to worry about that. That will be learning where. Data validation. Data validation is the process of ensuring that that user input is clean, correct, and useful. Typical validation tasks are: has the user filled in the required fields? Has the user entered a valid date? Has the user entered the text in a numeric field? And those things we should check first. Most often, the purpose of data validation is to ensure correct user input, to prevent from being sent to the server, and to empty data. If that is arrived to the server, then that will be the redundant work, not necessary work. That should be avoided. Validation can be defined by many different methods and deployed in many different ways. Server-side validation also that is possible using the JSP or ASP or PHP. Into that server script program, we can check, we can do that validation, but that is not good. That should be avoided because server is so busy just to eliminate some burden, unnecessary burden of the server. We should avoid that situation. Thus, we should serve that the validation, if possible, in the client side. That is called the client-side validation. Is performed by a web server before input is sent to the web server. And let's look at this HTML constraint validation. HTML5 especially, that is containing more advanced features in terms of that constraint validation. HTML5 introduced a new HTML validation concept called constraint validation. And this HTML constraint validation is based on constraint validation, HTML input attributes. And we are very familiar to that because we learned. And also we learned this constraint validation using these CSS pseudo selectors. And let's look at some examples described in these tables, following tables. And constraint validation, DOM properties and methods. We didn't learn about this DOM. DOM means, that stands for Document Object Model. That is about the HTML elements, and that is containing properties and the method, and those are related to that. And we'll look at and we'll learn about this in detail later, especially in DOM section. But let's look at briefly the summarized table first. Constraint validation, HTML input attributes, as we learned already, and just to remind the previous attributes, those are related to this constraint validation. Disabled, input element should be disabled if that is being used then. And max, this is specifying the maximum value of an input element. Min value, min, this one is specifying the minimum value of an input element. Also pattern, as we learned already. And also in the midterm exam, probably I asked about this pattern attribute. This one is specifying the value pattern of an input element required, as we look at that this one in the previous example. This one is specifying that the input field requires an element and also type. You can refer to others. And this one is about the constraint validation, CSS pseudo selectors. And as we learned about the selectors, we can use this colon and disabled. This one is selecting input elements due to the disabled attribute specified. And if we are using this selector, then this one is selecting input element due to invalid values. And required. This one is selecting input elements due to the required attribute specified, and so on. And you can refer to others. JavaScript validation application program interface API. Constraint validation DOM methods here. From this one, I'll focus on the examples. Try it yourself, and that will be focused one if this one is containing a little bit complicated contents and complicated methods. Okay, the fundamental concept, fundamental contents should be understood. Okay, about this property, check validity. And this one is returning the true if an input element contains valid data. And this one is just for reference. Set, if we are using this one, then this one is setting the validation message property of an input element. If an input field contains invalid data, display a message like this. Let's focus on this example, that may be better for understanding. Okay, enter a number and click on any number, or you can click this one and click OK button. If the number is less than 10 or greater than 300, an error message will be displayed. Okay, this one is successful, and this one is in the scope of that range. Okay, input ID and the type number, minimum number should be 100 and maximum 300. Thus this 102 or 200. Those are in that range. Thus we can get this successful message, input OK. And how that is being implemented, let's look at this script. And function, my function is doing that, and that is invoked here as an event handler program. Here ID1, that is the ID name for that element here, and we can get the input object. This one is input object ID1. Let's look at this one. Let's look at this one, ID1. This one. And this one is checking whether that is valid or not. This one is check validity. And that output is Boolean value. If that is not valid, then that will be false. If that is valid, that will be true. Thus this one is checking. This is exclamation mark means not. Thus that means if that is not true, that is false, then valid message, some message. Let's look at some big number, then we can get that message. Value must be less than or equal to 300. This validation message is this one. That will be shown here. If that is successful, then that means this one, the case is this one, then this value. Okay, let's look at this proper value. Then this message will be shown out on the screen. Okay, after closing some open tabs, let's continue. Constraint validation DOM properties. Okay, you can just refer the others, and if that is being used in the example, then please focus on that property. This one is containing Boolean properties, as we used already, related to the validity of an input element. And the validity properties we used before. These properties are showing true if a custom validity message is set. This one is Boolean value. True or false. Pattern mismatch, range overflow. You can refer to them as a reference. Example, and as I mentioned already, if those are a little bit complicated, then please focus on the example. And the example, this one is using this one, range overflow, and among this validity, range overflow here, underflow or overflow, range overflow. This one will be set to true if an element's value is greater than its maximum attribute. Thus, please focus on that. Focus on this rather than others, and I may ask about that in the quiz or even in the midterm exam. Thus, I am asking you to focus on the very fundamental concept and contents. Okay, here we can check that range overflow, and that will be a Boolean value. Okay, here I'll click this one, enter number and click OK. Enter number like this, then click, then this one is checking, and this one is explain about this validity property and the range overflow property, and that will be Boolean value. Range overflow if that value is too large, and that will be false. That means that input is okay. This one is checking that because of this. This input HTML element in HTML5, this maximum attribute is checking that. Maximum 100, and let's try to put in 500. That is out of the scope. Then you can see value too large because of this. Range overflow, that is true, thus that will be shown here. The number in an input field is less than 100, input's minimum attribute. Display message. This is the example for this description. Minimum 100. And this one is checking the range underflow. And here. But the minimum should be 100. But let's try to put in some smaller number than that, intentionally, to generate some error message here, value too small. Okay, this one, range underflow, that is true here, this message will be shown. In other case, input is okay because of this message. Okay, let's move to next. Okay, this section is about JavaScript objects. And there are several chapters among them. I'll try to select most fundamental chapters. Thus, you would better focus on the fundamental chapters selected. Okay, anyhow, I'll describe the selected chapters, especially excluded chapters in the UTD crossed mark chapters in the announcement later. In JavaScript, objects are king. If you understand object, you understand JavaScript. This one is showing some importance of the object in this JavaScript. In JavaScript, almost everything is an object, but some object we should avoid, and as that was explained in the previous chapters, the new keyword, if possible, that should be avoided, even though we can use, but that will be complicated, and that will degrade the performance. And the booleans can be object, but that should be avoided. Later, those will be explained again. Also, numbers can be object if defined with the new keyword, but if possible, we should avoid to use that new keyword. Okay, days are always object, messages are always object, and arrays are always object, functions are always object, and objects are always object, of course. All JavaScript values except primitives are objects. What is primitive? A primitive value is a value that has no properties or method. Only object can contain this property and method. Primitive data type is data that has a primitive value. And there are 5 times of primitive data types here: string, number, boolean, null, and undefined. And primitive values are immutable. Immutable means that cannot be changed, not changeable. Okay, you can refer to others. Objects are variables, a kind of variable. Object is a kind of variable. JavaScript variables can contain single values. The main difference between variable and object is how many variables are contained in this variable. Variable will contain single variable, single value, but objects can contain many values with the name value pairs. This value has some name. The values are written as name column value pairs, and the others are enumerated, and those are separated with this comma. And name value pair, we are using this colon. A JavaScript object is a collection of named values like this. Object properties, the named values in JavaScript objects are called properties. This is called properties or property names, and this is value, property value. Simply this one is property and this one is value. Objects written as name value pairs are similar to in other language. We are using associative arrays in PHP, dictionaries in Python, and hash tables in C, hash maps in Java, hashes in Ruby and Perl, and this is just for reference. You don't need to worry about that if you are not familiar with them. Object methods. Methods are actions that can be performed on objects. Object properties can be both primitive values, other objects, and functions. An object method is an object property containing a function definition. This is the property, and this one is containing this function definition. That is different from others. The other properties are containing just these values simply, but this property, this is called method. This one is containing function definition like this. And the JavaScript objects are containers for named values called properties and methods, as we observed already in the previous examples. Creating a JavaScript object, how we can create. With JavaScript we can define and create our own object in this way. There are different ways to create new object. Define and create a single object using an object literal. This is most common way, and recommendable way to create object. And even though this one is not recommended, there is another way: define and create a single object due to the keyword new keyword, but that is not recommendable as described in the previous chapters. Define an object. Finally, another way: define an object constructor and then create object of the constructed type. Also in ECMAScript 5, new way, this one is the new way to create an object. An object can also be created with the function object.create, and that is the function's method. That is the way introduced in ECMAScript 5. And that is just for reference. Using an object literal, this one is the most recommendable way to create object. This is the easiest way to create a JavaScript object. Using an object literal, literal means this, curly braces. This is the most common way to create object. That is the recommendable way. Using an object literal, we can define and create an object in one statement like this. These curly braces, and inside of curly braces, those name value pairs are enumerated. Another way, that is same. These spaces and line breaks are not important to create this object. In this way also we can create exactly the same. Using the JavaScript keyword new, even though this one is not recommended and this one is introduced already, but this one is one way. Thus this is another method to create the object. Thus this one is introduced here. The following example also creates a new JavaScript object with 4 properties. Here, 4 properties. This is property value. We can create in this way with a new keyword. For simplicity, this one is being repeated again. For simplicity, readability, and execution speed, use the first one, the most common way, the object using the object return method. This one is about this way. This is object return to create object. Curly braces. Okay, this one is explaining about some changeability. JavaScript objects are mutable. Mutable, that means they can be changed. They are addressed by reference, not by value. If person is an object, the following statement will not create a copy of person. This one is assigned to X, and this one is not creating new object. And the object X is not a copy of a person. X is exactly the same to this person object. Here, both X and the person are the same object. Thus, here we can see here, even though x.age that is being changed, and original the object was person, and that is assigned to this X, and this age that is being changed here, and later if we are checking that person.age, then exactly the same value is being shown here. Okay, let's move to the next. JavaScript object properties. Properties are the most important part of any JavaScript object. This one is explained about that JavaScript properties. Properties are values associated to that JavaScript object. A JavaScript object is a collection of unordered properties, and properties can usually be changed, added, and deleted, but some are read-only. First one, accessing JavaScript properties, we can access in this way. Object name first, dot, and property here, property name, or then like this, person.age. Or you do this square bracket, and you should be careful about this double quote or single quote. We should use that. Or expression, even that can be used. Okay, example. In this way, person.first name, and or in this way, person.first name, but we are using square bracket, and this property is enclosed into this quote. Let's try to change to this single quote. Still we can get the same result. Those double quote or single quote, it doesn't matter. Also we can access repeatedly into this for in loop. The JavaScript for in statement loops through the properties of an object. There may be many properties. We can access them using this loop repeatedly. For in loop, that is called for in loop. And here about this syntax, this should be the variable, and this is object name, and this is the execution code. The block of code inside of the for in loop will be executed once for each property. There are many properties, then that will be repeated as the number of the properties. And looping through the properties of an object like this. There are 3 properties here: fname, lname, age, and this is being repeated 3 times. X is first one, fname, second one, lname, third one, age. And we can concatenate the value together, and we can show out the result here. That is the value for each property. Even addition of a new property, that is possible here. Person.nationality. Nationality that was not defined initially, and later we cannot add person.nationality English, and later we can verify whether that is being inserted, added or not, and that nationality that will be shown properly here, thus that is being added successfully. Okay, you can report to others. I'll select fundamental concept. Property attributes. All properties have a name. In addition, they also have a value. The value is one of the property's attributes. Other attributes are enumerable, configurable. Other attributes are enumerable, configurable, and writable. These attributes define how the properties can be accessed. In JavaScript, all attributes can be read, but only the value attribute can be changed. Okay, prototype properties. And this one is about the inheritance. JavaScript object inherit the properties of their prototype. And the delete keyword does not delete inherited properties, but if we delete the prototype property, it will affect all objects inherited from the prototype. This one is called prototype properties. Special object. To create object, we need prototype. That is about that. This one is about JavaScript object methods. Here, this is the method, and this property is containing the function definition. Here, this keyword was explained in the previous chapter somewhere in this JavaScript tutorial, and this one is explained again here. In a function definition, this refers to the owner of the function. In the example above, here, this is the person object that owns the full name function. In other words, this dot first name means the first name property of this object, person object. Let's look at this one, JavaScript method. A JavaScript method is property containing a function definition that was introduced several times in the previous chapter. Okay, this one, about this one. This is property and this one is containing this function definition. How to access object method. Here object name first and the method name. And if we wanna execute that function, then we should use these parentheses. We'll typically describe full name as a method of the person object, and this just the property name, like this full name, that is indicating only the function definition. We'll look at that example later, and that means if we are using these parentheses, in that case that will be invoked and that will be executed like this. We should use that. This parenthesis is important to execute, to invoke. Okay, here that full name, that is property and name, and this is the value, and that is the function definition and the property value. The property name is full name. If we want to execute that function, then we should use these parentheses. Then that will be executed. But if we are not using these parentheses, and if we are using only that the property name, full name here, then that will show out the definition, function definition. This one, this value will be shown out here. This one is explained about that. If we access the full name property and without parentheses, it will return the function definition like this. This one is explained again. Using built-in method, these two uppercase. Sometimes we want to change the character string to uppercase, then there is some built-in method. The functions are defined already, and simply we can use that. Then we should know the name of that function, method to uppercase. Then simply this one is converting this one to this uppercase characters string. Okay, and you can try others. Let's move to the next. Okay, JavaScript display objects. How to display JavaScript objects? Displaying a JavaScript object will output object like this. Here, this person is declared here with these curly braces. Most simple way to create object and the recommended way. And here we are showing out the person, and this one is showing that this is our object. Some common solutions to display JavaScript objects are displaying the object property by name, displaying the object property in loop, point loop, as we learned already, and others. And this one is using object.values, and this one is using JSON. JavaScript object notation .stringify. Stringify, that is the method belonging to this JSON object. Display object properties. How to display object property. This one is one example for that. The properties of an object can be displayed as a string, like this, person.name, and we can access each individual values, and we can concatenate together. We can show out. And also, as we learned already, we can use for-in loop, and X means each property, and that will be repeated to show out the whole properties. 3 properties here, and those will be concatenated together, and that will be shown out. And here, this is one remark about that X. X is here variable. Thus you cannot use person.x, that will generate error. Person.x will not work because X is variable. Also, object.values we can show out. We can display that object. Any JavaScript object can be converted to an array using object.values. Here, object.values. A simple example, let's look at this one. This one is using that, and let's see how that can be used here. Here simply object.values and simply the person object name here. Then this one is creating my array variable, and that is assigned to that. And simply those are delimited to this comma, and those character string can be shown out here. This property value, John 50, New York, here. Okay, this is one way, and another way, depending upon the version number, the supportability may be different. This one is probably new way. This most recent one, recent versions or recent browsers of that version of that version of that browser is supporting that. Okay, this one is about JSON, using the JSON JavaScript object. Use the JSON stringify method function we can use. This one to show out that object property values. Here, stringify, JSON.stringify person, then my string is this JSON format, JSON syntax. That means curly braces is enclosing, and inside this name value pair, but those are using this double quote. Even property value that is enclosed into this double quote, and this pure numeric number that is not enclosed into that double quote. The others, the property name and property values, those are using this double quote. That is JSON format, JSON syntax. JSON notation. Okay, you can report to others. Okay, stringify. This one is explaining a little more about that stringify. This one is not working to the functions. They cannot be stringified. Okay, this one is using that stringify. And here we are showing out that result here, but this one is not included. Only this property, normal property and value, that those are shown out here. There's this function, those are not shown here. There's JSON.stringify will not stringify functions. Okay, after closing some open tabs, let's continue. Okay, you can try others. Okay, this one is another example to stringify arrays. It is also possible to stringify JavaScript arrays like this. And simply we are using JSON.stringify, and simply in this parenthesis we are using that array name here, and those will be stringified into JSON syntax notation like this. But utility is square bracket because this is array. The result will be string following the JSON notation. Okay, let's move to the next. Okay, the others. Okay, let's look at this left side menu. Then it will be easy to look at the whole chapters together. Okay, from here, I'll exclude, and later you may refer to them, but I will focus on the fundamental concept, and later you may try others, but in the scope of the online quiz number 2 online quiz test, and even in the final exam, I will exclude it, and those excluded chapters will be shown in the announcement later. And let's move to these functions. Also in advance, I am announcing that we'll focus on these 3 chapters among 6 chapters, and the remaining 3 chapters will be excluded. Thus we'll focus on that first 3 chapters. Let's continue. Okay, I'll close some open tabs, and here function definition. Even though we learn about the function in the previous chapters, this one is explaining more in detail about that function. First one is about function definitions. JavaScript functions are defined with the function keyword, and this one is very similar to the other programming language, especially C language. And we can use a function declaration or a function expression. This one is the syntax function of the function declarations. How to declare function. This is the example about that syntax. Function and the function name and the parameters inside of the parentheses, and these curly braces, that is the execution code. Probably we are familiar to this, and anyhow, let's follow this. Here, this one is the function declaration, and that will be invoked here with some parameters, and that will be passed to here, and that will be the argument here. and that will be used here to calculate, and the return the result will be the multiplication of that here. Semicolons are used to separate executable JavaScript statements. Since a function declaration is not an executable statement, it is not common to end it with a semicolon. Here, in this function declaration, we are not using a semicolon. This one is explaining about that. Additional comment about this. Function expressions. JavaScript function can also be defined using an expression. A function expression can be stored in a variable like this. This one is variable name x, and this is containing this function expression. Function AB, and this one like this. And let's try to use this one in this real example. Okay, x. Here x is simply showing out that the function expression on the right side of that equal assignment. Okay, let's move to next. After a function expression has been stored in a variable, the variable can be used as a function. Then it is simple and it is convenient to use this variable. And if we are assigning some values as parameters here, then that will be used here to calculate. After a function has been stored in a variable, and this is what is explained about that, the variable can be used as a function. Usually the function above is actually anonymous. That means without a name. No name function. The function above ends with a semicolon because it is a part of an executable statement. This one is the difference between the previous function declaration. In that case, we didn't use semicolon at the end of that declaration. But here, we are using this semicolon because this is statement, executable statement, as is described here. Function constructor. JavaScript functions are defined with the function keyword, and the functions can also be defined with a built-in JavaScript function constructor called function. In this way also we can create function, but this one is not recommended. If we are using new keyword, that in that case, most of the case of using new keyword, then those are not recommended. Most of the time, you can avoid using the new keyword in JavaScript. Okay, function hoisting. We learned about hoisting in this hoisting chapter in the JavaScript tutorial. JavaScript functions can be called before they are declared. This is called function hoisting. This one is hoisted to the top. Thus, even though this one is executed, even before the declaration of this one is executed because that function is hoisted to the top. Hoisting applies to variable declarations and also to these function declarations. Previous functions defined using an expression, in that case that is not hoisted. Okay, this one is about self-invoking function. Self-invoking, self-calling. In other words, function expressions can be made self-invoking. So self-invoking expression is invoked, called, or started automatically without being called. That is, in other words, that is more explanation about that. function expressions will execute automatically if the expression is followed by these parentheses. We cannot self-invoke a function declaration. We have to add parentheses to around the function to indicate that it is a function expression. Like this. Function, and we are using this one. And this one. In this way we can invoke. That is called self-invoking. In that case, let's look at this one. This is invoked. This is executed automatically. That is called self-invoking. And this one is executed if I am removing this one, then it is not being executed by itself. Functions can be used as values. The result of that will be the returned value, and that will be assigned to this. Example is like this. Here return value will be assigned, and finally that will be here, the remaining here, and that will be returned here, and that value 12 will be assigned to x. This seems like a variable. It seems to be the number 12. Okay, JavaScript functions can be used in expressions like this. And the functions are object. If we are checking the type of operator about that function, then that will return of the function. Let's try to, okay, about the arguments. This is called argument, and how many arguments are there? With this length property, we can get how many? 2. A, that is 1, 2. Those we can get with this length property. And we should use this argument. Argument object, and that is containing that length property, and we can get the number of that argument. Okay, this one is simple. We don't need to use this one. Even though we are not using this one, always it is showing the result is same like that. That is the my function is this one. By function definition. ToString method returns the function as string, and even though we are not using that ToString, and it is showing that in default way. Arrow functions. We learned about arrow functions before. Arrow functions allow a shortened syntax for writing function expressions. We don't need the function keyword, the return keyword, and the curly braces actually here. But this one is the new feature in ES6 ECMAScript 2015 that was introduced, and you can refer to this. JavaScript function parameters. A JavaScript function does not perform any checking on parameter values or arguments. Function parameters and arguments we learned that functions can have parameters like this. And function parameters are names listed in the function definition. And the main difference between them, arguments, the main difference between this parameter and the argument. And this one is about the arguments. Function arguments are the real values passed to the function and or received by the function. In that case, that is called argument. In the function definition, that is called parameters. Parameter rules. JavaScript function definition do not specify data types for parameters. And the JavaScript functions do not perform type checking on the passed arguments. And JavaScript functions do not check the number of arguments received. Thus, there may be some missing arguments, less than declared. And the missing values are set to undefined. Okay, argument object. JavaScript functions have a built-in object called the argument object. The argument object contains an array of the arguments used when the function was called or invoked. Okay, let's try to use this one for better understanding. This one is find the max, and the parameters 4, 5, 6 was passed to here, and the function here. This one is checking. It is argument.length, even though that was not described, not here in this function as parameters. This one is checking how many arguments are being passed to here, and it's this length property, and this is iterating as the number of argument depending upon that length. Each argument value can be accessed in this way, and we can finally find out the maximum number. That is maximum. Let's try to change. How about this 40? Like this. Then it will find out the maximum value among those arguments. Okay, you can use this one also to get the sum. Using this argument array, depending upon the length, and that will be iterated, and that will be added together here. Arguments are passed by value. The parameters in function call are the function's arguments. And the JavaScript arguments are passed by value. The function only gets to know the values, not the arguments allocations. If a function changes an argument value, it does not change the parameter's original value. And the changes to arguments are not visible outside the function. That is characteristic of the JavaScript. Arguments. But here, arguments are passed by reference. In JavaScript, object references are values. Because of this, objects will behave like they are passed by reference. If a function changes an object property, it changes the original value. Changes to object properties are visible outside the function. Let's move to the next. Okay, this one is about JavaScript function invocation. How to call, how to start. That is called invocation, invoke. The code inside the JavaScript function will execute when something invokes it. Invoking a JavaScript function. A code inside the function is not executed when the function is defined. As we learned already, this one is the summary for that. The code inside the function is executed when the function is invoked. It is common to use the term call a function instead of invoke a function. Exactly the same. It is also common to say call upon a function, start a function, or execute a function. Those are same. In this tutorial, we'll use invoke, because a JavaScript function can be invoked without being called. Invoking a function as a function, like this. Or like this. And here, let's look at this explanation. My function and window.myFunction is the same function. And because this my function is belonging to that window object. This one is explained about this keyword again. And in JavaScript, the saying called this is the object that owns the current code. The value of this, when used in a function, is the object that owns the function. Note that this is not the variable. That is the keyword. The global object. Here, this one is belonging to the window object. Thus, this means window. Thus, if we are showing out that, then object window, that is window object. After closing some open tabs, let's continue. Invoking a function as a method. In JavaScript, we can define functions as object methods. The following example creates an object, my object, with two properties, first name and the last name, and the method full name. Here, first name, last name, and method full name, and this is the definition, the value, and that is the function definition. And here my object and this full name method is being executed, and this one will be executed. Okay, this one is about this. This one is returned, and this will return object. This is object, the own object. This one is about function constructor. If a function invocation is preceded with a new keyword, it is a constructor invocation, even though this new keyword is not recommended. And you can refer to this briefly, but just for reference. With this one, we can create new object. This is called function constructor. This is the example for that. This is function definition, declaration, and with this new keyword we can use this function constructor. We can create this object, and we can show out the first name here. A constructor invocation creates a new object. The new object inherits the properties and method from its constructor. This keyword in the constructor does not have a value. The value of this will be the new object created when the function is invoked. And that is explained about this. Okay, that's it. And I will skip the others, about 3 chapters. remaining. Thus I selected these 3 chapters in these function sections. Thus we completed before this DOM, and later we learn about this DOM and BOM. This is browse object model. This DOM is document object model. We learn about them, those chapters, and we'll go to the HTML5 API, and they are using some JavaScript, so we learn about that after finishing this DOM and BOM. Thus, that will be the scope for the online QG test. Until this DOM and BOM. Next lecture we learn about it. Today I wrap up this lecture here.